Just when it looked like stability was finally creeping back in. You know, China tariffs down to around 30%, a deal with the UK, done. And Trump actually sounding optimistic about a deal with the EU just a week ago. Well, that was until yesterday, because on Truth Social, Trump dropped a bombshell, a 50% tariff on EU goods coming into the US. And in an interview right after, he once again made it very clear how he feels about the EU.
I've been saying to everybody, they've treated us very badly over the years. It was formed in order to hurt the United States, in order to take advantage of the United States, and they've done that. We have a big deficit with them.
Now, just to be very clear, no, the EU was not created to screw over the United States. And for any MAGA watchers out there, you can click the video above for the actual story of how the EU was created. Spoiler, it had a lot more to do with avoiding war than annoying America. So why this sudden 50% tariff? When asked whether the EU could do anything about it, Trump replied,
I'm not looking for a deal. I mean, we've set the deal, it's at 50%. But again, there is no tariff if they build their plant here. Now, if somebody comes in and wants to build a plant here, I can talk to them about a little bit of a delay. But, while they're building their plant, which is something I think that would be appropriate, maybe.
So, officially, it's about bringing manufacturing back to the US. But unofficially, there might be more going on. According to the European Council on Foreign Relations, Trump's demands reflect deep US frustration with the EU's calm bureaucratic style, clashing with his love for flashy quick deals, even if they don't amount to much. The Council also highlights a lack of clarity in US trade goals. Does Washington want the EU to cut ties with China, buy more American LEG, or US weapons? No one really knows. And there's tension on food standards too. The EU Trade Commissioner recently said that EU rules on agriculture are not up for negotiation. This came after US complaints about Brussels blocking hormone-treated meat and chicken. To be honest, thank God we do. And then there's Greenland. Yes, Greenland just signed a minerals deal with European countries. Probably not a highlight of Trump's week. The EU is simply not really backing down, and as the Trade Commissioner posted on X, EU-US relations must be built on mutual respect, not threats, which might have struck a nerve in the Trump world. So, before we look at what the EU can do next, let's talk about where things stand right now. Currently, the US has slapped 25% tariffs on EU steel, aluminium, and most infamously, cars. Everything else coming from the EU, that's sitting under a 10% tariff. But that could double to 20% on July the 8th, when Trump's 90-day pause runs out. And the EU's response? Not much yet. Back in April, the EU approved tariffs on 21 billion euros worth of American imports, targeting classic American goods. Bourbon, blue jeans, Harleys, you know the drill. But they never went into effect because Trump announced a 19-day pause on the 20% tariffs and the EU held back. But that may be about to change. 2 weeks ago, the European Commission proposed countermeasures worth around 95 billion euros in US imports if negotiations with Washington fail. This would be a direct response to Trump's car tariffs and reciprocal tariffs. The new EU list includes US aircraft, cars and car parts, medical devices, and a range of electrical equipment. Now, who gets hit hardest in Europe? Mostly Germany and the Netherlands, followed by France, Belgium, and Ireland. And even if this gets implemented in July, keep in mind, the value of these countermeasures, around 95 billion euros, is still far smaller than the 379 billion euros in EU exports affected by Trump's tariffs. But now things could escalate much faster, because apparently Trump doesn't think this is enough. And starting on June the 1st, he says he will apply a 50% tariff across the board, everything. Now this is a big deal, because let's not forget how big this relationship is. In 2023, the United States was the EU's biggest trading partner, accounting for about 17% of all EU trade. Goods and services flowed both ways, totaling 1.6 trillion euros. That's billions crossing the Atlantic every single day. The EU exported 820 billion to the US, and the US sent 770 billion back. That's simply a massive trade partnership. So what now? What can the EU actually do? We see three options, and the first is to do nothing. In this scenario, the EU refrains from retaliation and instead pursues negotiations for tariff reductions and exemptions. The hope here? that Trump, who changes his mind every few days, will either water down the 50% tariff or make a last-minute deal to avoid disaster. But doing nothing is risky. It sends the signal that Europe can be bullied, and that's never a good position to start from. The second option is to respond with limited, targeted tariffs. This means moving more quickly to impose the €95 billion tariff package the Commission has already prepared, maybe even adding pressure in politically sensitive areas. For example, the EU could target soybeans from Louisiana, the home state of House Speaker Mike Johnson, a key Trump ally in Congress. But this kind of retaliation is a double-edged sword. It might look strong on paper, but in practice, it could come off as cautious or even weak. So what then? Either the EU backs down, falling back to option 1, or it escalates into the final option, a full-blown trade war. This would mean proportionate retaliation across most US imports. For example, the EU could simply respond with a flat 50% tariff, just like the US did. Yes, it would be super costly, but history shows this approach can work. China went into the trade war with tariffs going up to 135%. The US quickly backed down from its toughest China tariff once the economic pain became too real. Maybe it will happen again. And here's the thing, the EU does hold real leverage here. It could strike the US where it's especially vulnerable. Services. While the EU does run a €157 billion trade surplus in goods, it has a €109 billion deficit in services, particularly in digital services, where US companies dominate. American tech giants like Google and Meta could be targeted. Then there's EU's most powerful legal weapon, the anti-coercion instrument, a newly adopted tool designed to hit back when foreign governments use economic pressure to force EU countries to change their policies. With it, the EU could do more than impose just tariffs. It could delay or deny business licenses for US firms, block access to public contracts, restrict intellectual property rights, or even ban US investments in the EU altogether. Yes, this is the nuclear option, and let's not hope it gets to that. So, those are the three options the EU currently has. And here's how I see it. This is turning into a waiting game, a test of political stamina. Will EU leaders stay united long enough to apply real pressure, or will some start to break ranks and cut side deals with Trump? And on the other hand, how long until Trump is forced into a U-turn by a weakening US economy and once again a dropping stock market? Let's not forget, the last trade war with China escalated super fast and then abruptly de-escalated. Maybe we're headed for the same pattern here. That's why, in my view, the most likely outcome will fall somewhere between option 2 and 3. I could imagine the EU hitting back with targeted tariffs on planes and cars, maybe combining that with regulatory pressure on US digital giants, through tools like the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act. But honestly, it all feels a bit insane, doesn't it? Trump won't coordinate further sanctions on Russia, yet he's perfectly happy slapping a 50% tariff on Europe the very same week. It really does make you wonder, who are Trump's actual allies? Thank you so much for watching, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And to support us further, consider joining us on Patreon and vote on video ideas every week. Thank you so much to our presidents, Jan, Schauke, Christian, Peter, HEVD, Unite Europe, Stefan, and Mr. Probot. See you in the next video.